Welcome to a Healer's Guide to Neltharus, where we cover dungeon mechanics from the healer's point of view. If you want to see healer guides to the other dungeons, check out the playlist down below. My name's LBNinja7, let's jump into it. We'll cover the bosses from left to right, but you can access either of the first two bosses in either order. But first things first, this dungeon has chains scattered throughout that are very important for you as the healer to understand. Players can grab these chains and run them through an enemy to stun and increase the damage taken by any nearby enemies. As the healer, it is so important for you to notice who is grabbing a chain, as they will take heavy damage while holding it. And you should add spot healing them to every pack that has a chain nearby. But with that out of the way, let's head toward Magma Tusk. The trash leading up to the giant fire elephant has sneaky kill potential, so be on your toes. Make sure and dodge Volcanic Guard, which has a small frontal cone cast by the wardens. There is also a small but very deadly swirly in this hallway called Explosive Concoction. As healers, we should be way too big brained to let the avoidable things kill you, so make sure and dodge these mechanics. But speaking of avoidable damage, there are some stoppable casts here as well. The cast that should eat up your interrupt is Molten Core, which attempts to convert a normally non-threatening or elemental into a much scarier enemy. So do your best to not let this go off. Next up is Magma Conflagration, which is a channel that the thaumaturges do into one random ally. That most likely will kill them if you don't either stop this cast or combat it with serious spot healing. What you'll be spending the most time healing is your tank actually, as they'll be pressured by Blazing Slash and Brutal Strike, and then swapping immediately to the Magma Conflagration channel target before that damage takes your DPS's life. If you stay on top of these few mechanics and heal through that channel, you'll be at the first boss in no time. Now, although the first boss, Magma Tusk has some pretty serious heal checks and higher keys, but part of that is because it becomes a damage race toward the end, but we'll get into that in a bit. The first and most important mechanic for you to understand is Volatile Mutilation. This does heavy party-wide damage and leaves behind a slow ticking dot that ticks once every 4 seconds. Your main priority in this fight is to make sure that everyone is topped up before this massive slam hits, and have a cooldown ready to top them up right after that damage to combat the dot. The next mechanic is Lava Spray, which just locks onto one of your allies and then hits them and any enemy behind them. I find it best to stand still if you're selected to make it easier for others to move out of the way. But you should spot heal this person before and after that damage hits them, but it shouldn't be that bad when the fight first starts. Finally, the boss has Blazing Charge, which will lock them in the direction of one of your allies, and then the boss will charge in that direction until they hit a wall. Be very careful though about chasing the boss, as getting trampled by it will do nasty damage, basically one-shotting you, and the boss also sends out lava waves once it collides with the wall. So hang out to the side a bit and play this very safely, as being reckless will cause more harm than it would good. Now earlier I said that this boss is a race, so let's talk about why that is. Each time the boss casts Volatile Mutilation, it will gain a new tentacle. I know an elephant with tentacles is very weird, but each tentacle causes each of its other mechanics to scale up in difficulty. For example, Volatile Mutilation gains 4 more seconds of the dot with each tentacle, Lava Spray will do its damage times the number of tentacles, and Blazing Charge will have 1 extra lava wave shoot out per tentacle. So as the fight goes on, respect the damage of Lava Spray with defensives and externals, as well as having more healing lined up for the dot after Volatile Mutilation, since eventually this damage will tick for just a bit too long for you to handle, so it's also very important to squeeze in as much damage during the downtime as you can. But once you win that race, it's off to one of the scariest bosses to heal this entire season. However, before you get there, you do have some more trash to worry about. Now you guys know I like starting off with talking about what to dodge, so let's just keep that going. First up is Eruptive Crash, which is an ability of the mini-boss Overseer Lahar, where he does a big swirly under the tank, and then after that swirly goes off, it erupts into smaller swirlies. There is also a frontal to watch out for called Magma Fist that is actually a channel, so dodge it and then stay out for the full duration. Finally, there are these small brown swirlies from Binding Spear. And if an ally is hit by this, it does a ton of damage, but it also stuns them for 10 seconds if they survive. So do your best not to get hit by any of these effects, and then you just have to worry about healing the minor amount of mechanics through this corridor. For starters, there are a few chains in this hallway, so be aware of them and who is grabbing them so you know who to keep alive. Apart from that, the mechanic that will keep you the most busy is probably Bone Toss. This is a lot like the shoot mechanics in Knockout Offensive, so follow these up with spot heals or heavy maintenance healing and try to be aware of who they're targeting. The mechanic that is most likely to claim a life from one of your allies is Bold Ambush. This is when the hunter leaps to an ally and applies a heavy bleed. You will need to pocket heal this ally just as you did for Magma Conflagration, but also be ready to use a cooldown since multiple allies will be bleeding at a time. Make sure and pop a defensive to either slow down some of the Bone Toss damage, or if you get targeted by ambush, and damage the mobs while they're stunned by the chains to make it to Chargath even quicker. Oh, and a side note, Overseer Lahar will occasionally place a dispellable debuff on your tank, which you will want to take care of ASAP. Now, as we talk about Chargath, it's important to note that there's a lot of personal responsibility from all 4 of your other party members. However, as the healer, you should be prepared for them to fail and be ready to carry disastrous moments here. Now let's start off with his abilities, and let's start with Magma Wave. He'll simply lock on to where one of your allies is standing and shoot a lava wave that expands as it travels, kind of like a slow-moving frontal. As always, pre-position near the boss to limit the amount of movement you have to do to dodge this, as failing to do so will almost certainly get you killed. Now, the next 2 mechanics are what you really need to be equipped for. Dragonstrike is a mechanic much like Bold Ambush, where he leaps to a random ally and applies a heavy bleed. This ally should not only be spot healed through this bleed, but it is extremely important to keep them at full HP, since allowing the bleed to get multiple ticks into their health bar will make them very vulnerable to the next mechanic. Which, speaking of the next mechanic, it's more of a phase that the boss enters, but it started with Grounding Spears. The boss will select 3 allies, prioritizing your DPS, and then if a DPS is dead, he'll go for you, so be mindful of that. The boss then throws a spear at all 3 allies, doing heavy damage to all 3 of them, and anyone nearby. The spear will then stay on the ground where the player was standing, and they'll have to move away from them to create sort of a tripwire. Now, this is where the tank comes in. The boss will be chasing the tank, and I don't mean like a dog chasing the mailman. I mean full-on Michael Myers Halloween Out for Blood. And as the tank kites the boss over one of these tripwires, or if the tripwire extends over the boss, then it will break and explode into party-wide damage. And what makes this mechanic so difficult to heal is a cluster of factors that can be out of your control. The first of which is that the bleed will still be ticking through most of this phase, so that ally will need externals and hopefully a defensive of their own. The other thing is that your tank will be under serious heat as well, so that makes 2 allies that need significant spot healing. Aside from that, your whole party will take heavy damage when the spears drop, as well as when the chains pop, so you need your cooldown to cover each of those instances of damage. And finally, this phase can look totally different depending on how quickly the chains are popped one after another. My suggestion is to discuss this with your group before you start the key, just to see what the plan for popping chains will be, so that you as the healer know how to cover all of the damage with your cooldowns. But trust me when I say you will need those cooldowns here. It happens roughly once every minute, so if you have a 1-minute cooldown, you should be set, but alternating your 2 and 3 minute cooldowns per chain set on top of your 1-minute cooldown can alleviate a ton of the pain here. But be ready with a defensive and with all of your cooldowns just in case they decide to pop all 3 chains at the same time, and good luck. But after that monster is handled, we head upstairs toward the forge. This corridor downstairs once again has a few chains, so be mindful of them. The path to this boss is covered by a few different mobs that are almost always skipped, so I'll just talk about the mechanics that you're guaranteed to face. Now, the easiest way to avoid the most amount of damage here is by kicking the cast Mote of Combustion, or if you let it successfully cast, dispel the 6-second dot that it applies, or if you don't do either of those things, that ally will slowly melt away and explode at the end of the 6-second dot. So be ready to spot heal them before and after the explosion. Pierce Marrow is the most likely culprit though of your ally's death, as it is a large single target smack that the Bone Splitters will do to a random ally. Make sure that they are full or near full health before they take this hit, or consider even using an external defensive to mitigate that damage. You also need to know who is targeted by Dragonbane Axe, as it is a bleed that if ignored will either kill your ally or make them vulnerable to one of the previous mechanics. Apart from that, don't stand in any of the lava puddles and use spare AoE stops or kicks to stop as many melt casts as you can, as this cast will do a single target bit of damage, and if enough get off, it can overwhelm you as the healer. However, using a cooldown is also another way to combat this damage. As you approach Forge Master Gorek, try and come into the fight with a cooldown at the ready, as he starts his spell sequence kind of quickly. Here's how this fight looks. He'll first cast Might of the Forge, leaping to this position and doing heavy party-wide damage upon landing. Then he will bang his hammer on the anvil 3 times, each one doing another round of AoE damage. Prioritize having everyone near full HP before he leaps and have your cooldown popped so that it heals right after that damage, as well as covering the 3 hammer swings. This mechanic should always be met with one of your cooldowns, as it is the main healer mechanic of the fight. However, after the final swing, he will then mark 3 allies with Blazing Aegis. These 3 players will take another smack of damage, which is why it's extra important for you to have your cooldown rolling through the 3 hammer swings. Then, after they take the damage from Blazing Aegis, swirlies will come out from them in an X formation. If you are one of the lucky 3 players, then spread out from the other 2 and stand still so that your swirly pattern becomes predictable and more easy for the party to dodge. And consider using a defensive here, as this damage can hurt. After those swirlies, the boss will then cast Heated Swing, which is a significant tank damage combo, but it also launches the tank to the other side of this room. Make sure and throw some hots and some spot heals their way, but don't stand still for too long, as it will bait you into the next mechanic, which is Forge Storm. Forge Storm is just a few seconds of Swirly Storm, so those swirlies will follow where you're standing, so just be on the move. However, once again, be ready for his next mechanic, because as these swirlies are still spawning, he'll then leap back and start this whole cast sequence once again. So as you're dodging the Forge Storm swirlies, make sure and plan out your next cooldown for Might of the Forge. But with a few rotations of these spells, the final stretch of the dungeon will open up. There are some repeat mobs that you have seen before, but the 2 standout new mechanics that you should really be ready for are Molten Barrier and Candescent Tempest. When the Blazewing channels Candescent Tempest, pop a cooldown, as it does heavy damage while pushing you back. Also, the Lavamancer's Molten Barrier puts a shield on them as they cast Molten Army, spawning more and more enemies for you to fight. Do your best to help break the shield so that y'all can stop the cast, but make sure that everyone is topped up beforehand, as it erupts in AoE damage when broken. Also, there are a few bleeds that are going to be applied to your tank, and each Molten Army channel that goes off will add more and more tank damage, so be mindful of their health and defensive situation. But congrats, you made it to the final boss. However, I wouldn't celebrate just yet, because this boss can be a bit brutal until you understand the mechanics. But hey, that's what I'm here for. First up, play near the boss, as he has yet another frontal cone. And pay attention to who he marks with Molten Gold, as this is another dot that you will need to combat with spot healing, since once again, failure to do so will make them susceptible to the main AoE damage phase. Next up, the boss will yeet out an enemy at one of your allies, so make sure to move out, as standing under this leads to bad things.
I'm in danger!
After the ad hits the ground, it's going to fixate onto one of your allies and leave behind a lava pool over any ground that it travels through. Either keep this enemy CC'd or be ready to burn it down. If it chooses you to fixate, try and stay away from it, but also try and kite it over lava that's already been dropped. Finally, the main mechanic of the fight, Magma Shield, which is when the boss simply just gains a giant shield, and I mean massive, to the point where normally damaging it won't be enough to break it. Instead, you'll need the help of trinkets that are buried under piles of gold all around the room. Be mindful though, because as long as you're holding a trinket, you're going to be taking a small amount of damage. And on top of that, your whole party is going to be taking heavy AoE damage as long as the boss has a shield. It is mandatory that you make sure everyone is full health before the shield is applied, and that you use a cooldown during this phase, as you will need to do enough healing not just to out heal the damage, but also to allow yourself some time to use your trinket. Keep blasting healing while the shield is active and use your trinket every single time. And if done correctly, all you're really going to have to worry about is all the swirlies on the ground. Keep in mind though that each trinket targets a bit differently, so just make sure you know which one you have, but they're all usable while moving. But after that, boss, you're done. That's every mechanic of Neltharus and how to handle it as a healer. If you're curious about any of the other dungeons this season, then make sure and check out that playlist down in the description below for more healer dungeon guides. This is still a new style of guide for me, so it would go a long way if you hit the like button and share it with one of your healing buddies, that between me and you might need some brushing up. As always, my name is ElvinNinja7, your resident Mistweaver monk, and without my subscribers or my patrons, videos like this would not be possible. So check out that Patreon link down below, and also do all the YouTube algorithm trickery and comment down below any other tips that you might have, and make sure and hit that subscribe button on your way out. Now you are so equipped to deal with this dungeon, go and smash this thing.